Good afternoon. You're watching AB Live, a brand new news-based chat show in which we discuss topics ranging from business, news, politics, and so much more. On today's episode, we will be explaining and discussing the two different arms of the retail sector in the UAE, which is brands and malls. And for that, in the studio, we had David Clover, who is from MBLM, and we have David Macadam from MECSE. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great. So before we get on to the topic today, I would like to know from you, David Clover, about MBLM. Tell us about the brand agency that it is.
Sure, absolutely. MBLM, we call ourselves the Brand Intimacy Agency. We're an international, multidisciplinary, independent agency, and we've been operating in the region, myself and my partner, for the last 20 or so years, and then under the name MBLM for the last 8 or so. So we've been here for a while.
All right, why the name MBLM?
That's a really interesting question. I like that you asked it. It really comes down to emblem, as in the literal word EMBLEM, but then we drop the E's.
All right, okay, so David Macadam, my question to you is, what exactly is MECSE? I'm aware it's a not-for-profit organization, but what exactly is it that you do?
Well, good question, and we get asked that all the time, what do we do? But the Middle East Council of Shopping Centers is an organization of about 1,350 members. We have about 750 shopping centers and about 1,100 retailers throughout the GCC that use us as a reference point to facilitate their business and to raise their own personal profiles in the industry.
All right, great. So right now you did mention that you do brand intimacy, and there was a recent report that you released. So can you tell us more about the findings of that report?
Certainly. So we've been running this study, the brand intimacy study, for the last 7 years. And this year, yes, we've just recently launched our 2019 report. What we do is we take a look at kind of within 3 markets around the world, USA, Mexico, and the UAE, what are the most intimate brands and what are the most intimate industries in the region.
Okay.
Yeah, we have our own methodology. It's a piece of research that we do. It's not sponsored by any brand or any other company out there. It's completely off the backs of our own company.
Right.
And really, it's got a lot of, well, the methodology is founded on principles that help define who we are and the services that we bring to our clients.
Okay, so now I just need to understand what exactly you mean by brand intimacy, the word.
Certainly. So I'd say the core definition is the science behind the bonds you form with the brands you use and love. Okay.
Oh, wow, that's a very, very scientific definition.
Yeah, it's all about the emotional connections that you have with brands. It's like a relationship, just as 2 people would have a relationship. The same kind of relationship is true with you yourself and a brand that you like and love.
All right, great. So what David from MBLM does is more specific to brands, and brand intimacy is one area that you actually cater to. But what you do there is very generic. You're catering to the mall industry and the mall sector, the field in general.
Sure, I think you could say anything that's retail related, so that it could be anything from architects who do retail shopping centers to the management and the staff inside shopping centers to the retailers, the developers, everyone who's involved in the retail industry.
Okay.
We have a stakeholder with them.
All right, great. So now if I had to ask you, David, what is it that the brands in the UAE right now or globally are doing right in terms of brand intimacy, and how exactly are they using this concept to profit?
I think all the successful brands, what we see them doing very well is leveraging those emotional connections through a number of devices that we've kind of coined. Their archetypes, stages, domains, and they're quite complex when it comes to the actual implementation of them, and these brands are doing them almost instinctively. They understand that there's a lot of global challenges out there right now that's influencing the world of marketing and making these connections, like technology, like personalization, and they're adapting and finding ways that they can be closer to individuals, bring their brands almost to that point where they're indistinctive, they're fused with the consumer, and that's really what we see as a common trait amongst all very successful intimate brands.
All right, so I have this question for both of you all here, but I'm going to start with you, David. We've seen a number of new rules being introduced in the market recently with the 100% foreign ownership, 10-year visas, and of course VAT, which directly impacts the retail sector. So what is the reaction that you've gotten from the various retailers that you cater to?
About VAT? Well, I think VAT has been, first of all, it's globally recognized that value-added taxes are the norm in most countries. So most of our retailers are from a global background. So therefore, I would suggest the VAT has been a pain to initiate, but it's one of those issues that you look at it, it was coming, and I think people expected it.
Right.
But it's just the change in the idea of having to accommodate that in what you're doing daily.
Okay, so what would you say is the retail outlook for the coming years, say this year and the next year?
Well, I think it's great. It's remarkably upbeat, as a matter of fact. I think in the region overall, certainly it's tied to the oil price, so I think that's very positive recently. I'd also suggest here in the UAE, with the coming of Expo 2020, there's been a large buildup over the number of years about what's going on with Expo 2020. Many of the retailers, a lot of the food and beverage, a lot of what's going on in the industry is gearing itself towards this Expo 2020. So there are great expectations coming.
Okay.
I would also suggest that the retail business is always in cycles, ups and downs, and I'd say that we're on the way up again because it's been trending downward for the last couple of years, and I think that we're at the bottom of it and on our way up.
Okay, so it's basically like the real estate cycle that we see. It's a whole
very similar. Very similar.
Wait, I'm going to get to that point very soon, but before that, just on the lines of the outlook that he mentioned for the whole retail sector, but I'd like to know with regards to brands, what are the key trends that are taking this particular region by storm when it comes to brands?
Certainly. So I already mentioned personalization as one of the challenges that everyone's facing. There's also this idea of proliferation, and I think in the Dubai market it would be difficult to say that there aren't a lot of brands here. So how one brand kind of fights through the noise and gets heard amongst this kind of deluge of other brands, it's another challenge that they have to be part of. And then also this idea of technology. Right. So the advent of technology or social media and the mobile devices have brought you much closer to brands. That you can almost create an engagement instantaneously by looking at something on Instagram, form an opinion about it, and then a couple of days later that could change, and that relationship that you have could change depending on the content that you see. So another challenge that we see the brands having here is just how do they implement technology effectively in relation to the end user.
Right, so it's not just digitization that we're talking about. There's also emerging technologies. For example, people are talking about AI, there's artificial intelligence, there's virtual reality, and all of these things are being incorporated. But do you think it is going in the right way, in the right direction? And this question is for both of you, because we've seen that happening with the malls, with the major malls in the country, but are they doing it right?
I think it's a trial and error, as everything is in life, sadly to say. And I think that it's only good news. I'm a very positive person and when I have the outlook on this, because I know that there are checks and balances that keep things going the way they should. I really believe there's a way forward for artificial intelligence in the retail industry. The same with blockchain, with all of these other elements that are coming forward. It's only a matter of time before they're adopted in a manner that I think will be very beneficial for the industry.
All right, great. So then we've also seen a number of brands globally, for example, Apple, Amazon, etc., who've leveraged on this whole digital transformation that has been happening. But do you think this again goes hand in hand with the concept of intimacy that you are trying to essentially explain to your customers?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people in this digital transformation, they understand what big data means, this behavioral understanding, and how it can help drive business decisions. So we see this a lot with Amazon, their takeover of Soup.com last year. In our reports back in 2017, they were in position 8 in terms of a retailer. They're now in position 1 this year. So they're doing all the right things in terms of creating those intimate connections with users, and I think in the case of Amazon, it's just going to grow and get better and get more personal. Jeff Bezos has a very clear understanding of what he wants Amazon to be, and for everybody to be part of it as well.
Okay, that's actually great to hear. But right now, all the brands that you've mentioned, or even in the book that was published about brand intimacy, the some pages that I read had most of the bigger corporations in it, like Amazon, like Apple, etc. But what about the smaller enterprises? What about the startups who are literally just hanging on shoestrings right now? So does brand intimacy also apply to them?
It certainly does. So we already talked about the idea of proliferation. So you can imagine a startup, someone new, doesn't have a lot of money, especially to spend on marketing. How do they pierce the veil of noise, right? So they're in terms of Google search, how do you compete with somebody who has $1 million marketing budget just on ads, and you're trying to bring up your company, you're trying to get heard? So by understanding brand intimacy and how it can be deployed, what you're creating is this deeper level of relevancy. So you cut through all the noise by talking to the individual, not at the individual, and building content, building narratives, building experiences that are specific to their needs.
All right, David, I need to ask you now, right, because you mainly deal with the bigger malls in the country, and we have an oversupply.
All of them.
Right.
We deal with all of them.
But would you agree when I say that we do have an oversupply of it? And I ask you this because you spoke to me about the trend, and you say that it's going up. But right now, as again, just a customer, when I go to the malls, I still see, if not in the bigger malls, the smaller malls, I see a lot of empty shops still prevalent. So is there an oversupply, and is that a problem?
Well, we talk about cycles again, and there are cycles within every element of the industry. I would suggest that the occupancy level of many shopping centers rises and falls throughout the year, over the years as well. And I'd say we're at a bottom point of that to rise up again. I think to the point about how well retailed are we here in the region, if you look at the US, let me give you a metric that you can think about for a second. So 68 square feet of retail for everybody in the US. So for 400 million people, there's 68 square feet. Okay, per person.
Yeah.
Okay. In the UAE, it's something like 17 square feet.
All right.
So there's quite a big difference.
Yeah.
And if you look at somewhere like the UK, for instance, it's around 12. Square feet per person.
Right.
So you can see that there's room for growth, but I think that in the UAE particularly, we're looking at the tourism component that really offsets what the locals don't contribute to the overall retail scene.
Right, so have you seen an uptick considering that the Russian tourists, for example, have started coming back?
Yes, and once again it comes back, in my view anyway, to the overall view of the world oil market. And once the oil prices are at a certain level, and I believe Russia's 30 to 40% of their GDP is driven on oil, so that trickles down into the economy, and the people who are involved in the oil industry have more money to spend.
Right.
I also think that their value of the ruble has moderated a bit over what it was in the past, so that they have more spending power. I just think also when you look out the window today, it's a nice sunny day, and it's like this pretty much every day. And when you live in Russia and other places a little bit further north, it's always great to come to a place like Dubai and warm up.
Right, so basically when their economy does well, then we do well as
People
well.
come. Yeah, of course. That's true.
That's great. But now that we're talking about the diverse demographic of tourists that are coming here, and of course we have the expatriates, a huge expatriate population here in the region, I would like to know what the brands are doing, or how can the brands actually cater to all of these diverse needs coming in, especially in this market.
Sure. So we already established the idea of personalization and getting closer and understanding what the end user wants. So it's very difficult to kind of assess remotely. So using the Russia example, how do you target specifically someone to either attract them to come to Dubai from a tourism angle, and then spend when they get to Dubai? And so it really understands. It really starts with the understanding of what they're looking for and what they need. So in the case of intimacy, you could use something very specific like a campaign that is in the that takes place in the country, and then through the various touch points that users interact or audiences interact with it, you get an understanding of what the interest is and preferences. You're kind of building up that behavioral data, and then that helps inform how you can then create other experiences and other narratives around that to bring them here.
Can you give me an example of that?
Certainly. So we've recently done campaigns where there was no existing research in foreign markets, and it's simply how do you use your marketing dollar more effectively.
Okay.
So let's say when we think about China and we think about the UAE, what are the Chinese interested in the UAE? You can guess, and that helps establish, through certain processes and through certain methodology, you can come up with a series of parameters to measure. So let's say you want to test beaches, you want to test shopping, you want to test let's say 5-star hotels, and you want to test food and dining. So you can run these kind of communications out in those markets, and then through which one kind of starts to work better, which messages connect better, which imagery, you can start to build up a picture, create a persona that you can then really put more of your spend into, creating a greater return on investment.
Understood. So just continuing our conversation there when we were talking about the trends and the cycles, at this juncture, do you see a tug of war essentially happening between rents and occupancies? We've seen that again with the real estate market. What's happening is the rents have dropped massively, drastically it's dropped. But do we see that happening with the malls as well?
I think what you have to look at, it's a little different analogy. What you look at is the rent that is received is a function of the sales that the retailers are making. So if they're high sales, they're higher rents. If they're not so high sales, it's a little lower rent. So I think that many of the landlords in the region now are well aware of this whole phenomenon. So when you have high sales, you're collecting more rent, and when you don't, you don't.
Right. So now the retail sector also contributes massively to the GDP of the nation. So would you have an idea as to the percentage of contribution that it does to the economy?
29.8% in the GDP of the UAE.
That's a very, very specific number. So right now, considering that the economy is so heavily dependent on the retail sector, what more is it that can be done to promote the sector and take it in the right direction, according to an expert?
Well, I would suggest that it's already being done. And the one thing about retail is it's always moving and it's always changing. And if you start to believe that retail the way it was in the past is the way it will be in the future, I think you'll be misled and probably just wrong. So my view is that what I see happening here and the building into the future of what this country will be, the UAE overall, and GCC larger as well, if you don't build into that future, you're not going to be able to receive the kind of benefits that you want to receive for your country overall and for the people who live here. So whether or not it'll be the same kind of retail that you and I are used to in the past 20 years, I could suggest it won't be, but who knows what it will be. But at least you have the infrastructure to accommodate that.
Right. How do you view the investment opportunities that are there in the retail sector right now, especially for the masses?
Well, for the masses, I don't know particularly. I would say for those with deep pockets, I think there's some great opportunities now. I think that it's like anything. When things are at their peak, they're the most expensive, and when they're a little less, then things are probably a little more reasonably priced. My sense of things is that when you have an opportunity to buy in the market like today, it's a good opportunity. All
right, great. Now, with regards to brands again, the same conversation I'm going to have with you with regards to brands, the more micro element of the retail sector, is what is it that the brands need to do now to keep up with evolving trends and the changes, especially local brands?
We see it as being a very challenging period. So with all the e-commerce options, with the big drives that Amazon are doing, you've got this kind of online, offline dynamic taking place where I think someone like Nike is doing especially really well. They're creating these in-store experiences, this kind of higher level of customer service, this kind of, they almost walk around with you. There are models potentially that are there showcasing their products, and the point of purchase might not necessarily be at the store, but it comes through online, through some other platform. So there's this diversity that needs to happen in terms of not the traditional way of marketing or not the traditional way of selling. You've got to think about the entire ecosystem and the point at which your products and services are actually purchased. It doesn't necessarily need to follow the old model of being in the store.
Okay, that's very interesting, because I was just reading a report where I read that millennials, especially now, they don't really believe in advertisements. They don't really buy adverts. So at that stage, what would you say people or brands need to do to convince people about their brand?
It goes back to this idea of the narrative. So the way that MBLM crafts its brands for its clients is through this concept of essence, story, and experience.
Okay.
So the essence is kind of coming up with this ownable force of attraction, something that's really compelling, that is very you, that everybody can understand as an idea. The story is that narrative that I keep talking about. It's coming up with the messaging, the way people understand you around the marketplace, what they read, what they see. And then the experiences are based on these first two, essence and story. How can you create really targeted, really specific, very relevant experiences that talk to these individuals? So in the case of millennials, yes, perhaps advertising isn't working particularly for them, although I might challenge that. But the idea of creating content that's very relevant, and so not you, by virtue of you creating something, people will come to you. So if we think about all the content generation that's happening across YouTube, across Instagram, blogs that are doing especially well, influencers that have been here for a very long time, and they keep kind of promoting brands, that's where we see a lot of those emotional connections being made.
Right, and do you see all of this, what David just mentioned right now, be converted or translated into sales, the different marketing strategies that are essentially being used by these brands?
Absolutely, yes. I would suggest that in the past, I would say a couple of years ago, many of the retailers were considering that the online phenomenon and the whole idea of holding everything in your hand on your handheld was something that was not that relevant to the bricks and mortar retailers. But I think that that's all changed. So best described by some of the leading retailers in this region, they said that we used to think that the online portion was a bolt-on to the whole industry, to what they were doing.
Right.
Now, they run a $4 billion business, but they didn't think it was going to permeate throughout the entire business. Now they've come back to say they've changed their business model beginning of this year, that all of the online retail now and all of the retail and the bricks and mortar is all one. And that gets back to your point about millennials, and I would say it's traditional means of advertising are probably not adopted by millennials, but advertising in a much different way, which is something that is less than 15 seconds if it's YouTube or Instagram, or if it's a short period of time, whatever it is you're looking at. It's the information comes and goes quite quickly, but it's also sitting in the back of their mind. So it's important.
So what you're saying is probably what the influencers, especially in this part of the world, are doing is right?
Well, they're doing very, very well. I'm top of mind as someone like Huda Beauty.
Okay.
I mean, fantastic business, lots of influencers, lots of exposure. I feel like they're doing it the right way. They're very relevant for the millennial crowd.
Okay, and what do you think about that?
Well, absolutely. You can't argue with success, and I think that their success has been phenomenal. I would also go so far as to say that this region has had some great success with Huda Beauty as well. But if you look globally, I think that, and China in particular, and this is a point I'd like to try and make, is that online sales in China are around 48% of all retail sales, versus in the US, which is the other major market when we think of Amazon, it's still less than 8%.
Oh.
And I think those are the numbers you have to bear in mind, that where we are with what we're doing here, I'd say it's somewhere in the middle.
Right,
We're
so
in the
Jack
Middle
Ma
East.
is doing a better job than Jeff Bezos.
Oh, much better in terms of getting traction in the market. Yeah.
All right, great. So finally, I'm just going to ask you one thing, considering we're in Dubai and just bringing the whole conversation back to the UAE. We have a bunch of malls which are destination malls. For example, you go to Dubai Mall not just to shop. You go there for the VR park, you go there for the aquarium, etc. But now we've also seen a surge in community malls, essentially. So what would you say at this juncture is working more, community malls or destination malls? I'll start with you, David.
Well, they're both working, and I'd say as long as the retailers that are in each of those two destinations are providing what the catchment, what the people and the demographics surrounding that are looking for, you're going to be eminently successful. So, for instance, in your local neighborhood community center, as long as you have a great access to fresh food and easy in and out and close proximity to home and easy pay, it's all going to work well.
All right.
If you look at how it's going to work with the larger scale projects as well, it's all about the entertainment component now and what is going on that's setting that particular building or whatever it is, shopping center aside as being special. It has to be reinvented often because people have to have a reason to keep coming back.
Right, and with regard to brands, what do the brands prefer more? Do they prefer, especially for intimacy, do they prefer community malls or the bigger destination malls?
I share very much of the same opinion as David, and he mentioned a number of initiatives or experiences that either the community or the larger malls are doing to help attract or retain people. I often think about the big one, Dubai Mall. I mean, I was there on the weekend and I heard Baby Shark as one of the fountain songs coming out, and then previously also, you know, the Chinese songs that come out for, and these to me are great advancements in creating these more experiences that catering to other people. I think if that, as long as that keeps extending out into who the relevant audiences are, in their case it's this international one, in the case of community it's more of the local catchment area, as long as they're focused on what the people need and how they can cater to those or the services around those needs, I think they'll be successful.
All right, great. Thank you so much, guys, for those valuable insights. We've definitely learned a lot about brands and malls and the wider retail sector today. And thank you for watching AB Live. We will be back again next Tuesday.
Thank you.